7 years ago, I married the woman of my dreams. We had dated for 2 years before that, and everything seemed perfect. I still remember how happy I was on our wedding day, thinking about the wonderful life ahead of us. But things changed pretty quickly after we tied the knot. My wife started feeling down all the time. At first, I thought maybe it was just the stress of adjusting to married life, but it kept getting worse. She would spend most of her time in bed, barely talking, barely living. I finally convinced her to see a doctor, who referred her to a therapist. That's when we found out she had depression linked to some difficult things from her past that she'd been trying to forget. I decided to step up and be the supportive husband she needed. I took over most of the housework, even though I was working full-time. Just focus on getting better, I told her. I'm here if you need to talk. That was 6.5 years ago, and looking back now, I realize I had no idea what I was signing up for. Life became an endless cycle of work and chores. I'd come home from my job to find the house a mess, then spend hours cleaning and cooking. By the time I finished, I'd be exhausted, but that's when my wife would usually start unloading all her troubles on me. She'd complain about everything, herself, me, the world. I couldn't even hang out with my friends anymore because she'd constantly call, but saying she was scared to be alone. I kept pushing through, telling myself this was just temporary. For better or worse, right? And this had to be the worst part. I kept hoping that one day she'd break out of it and we could have the life I'd dreamed of when we got married. Then, 4 months ago, everything changed. My wife started seeing a new therapist, and after a few sessions, she dropped a bombshell on me. The therapist had suggested that maybe I was the cause of her depression, since it started right after our marriage. When she told me this, I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. All those years of sacrificing everything to take care of her, and now I was being blamed for her condition. She decided to move in with her mother, saying she needed time away from me. I spent the next month calling her and her family constantly, begging her to come back. I apologized for everything I could think of, even things I knew weren't my fault. I was so desperate and hopeless that I started having dark thoughts. But as that first month passed, something unexpected happened. I started to feel relieved. For the first time in years, I could come home to a quiet house that stayed clean. I could actually relax and do things I enjoyed. I even started hanging out with my friends again, having a beer, laughing, just being normal. That's when the realizations started hitting me, one after another. I'd been miserable for years. I'd put my whole life on hold. I was still young, still looked good, and when I went out, I noticed women would actually flirt with me. I never flirted back, but it felt good to be seen as something other than just a caretaker. Then came the phone call that changed everything. My wife was sobbing on the phone, saying she'd made a huge mistake. She said she was wrong to listen to her therapist, that she loved me and wanted to come back. For a split second, I almost said yes. The old me would have jumped at the chance to have her back. But something had shifted inside me. Instead, I heard myself saying, "No, you left me and I'm done." I told her I'd be getting divorce papers ready. After I hung up, I broke down crying, but they weren't just sad tears. They were tears of relief, like I'd finally set down a heavy burden I'd been carrying for years. That's when everyone started coming out of the woodwork with their opinions. My family, her family, even some friends, they all thought I was making a huge mistake. Marriage isn't always fun, they'd say. You owe it to her to try again. But the thing is, our marriage was never fun. I couldn't remember the last time we'd even gone on a date or had any kind of intimacy. We hadn't been intimate for over a year, and I felt more like a servant than a husband. Still, their words got to me. Was I really going to abandon someone who was struggling with depression? Was I a terrible person for choosing my own happiness? These thoughts kept me up at night, making me question everything. After a lot of thinking, I decided I needed to at least talk to her face to face one last time. I invited her over to our house, thinking we could get some closure. What started as an awkward conversation turned into hours of honest discussion, probably the most honest we'd been with each other in years. I finally let out everything I'd been bottling up. I told her how exhausted I was, how nothing we'd tried had worked, how I felt like a doormat. I admitted that I was starting to regret even getting married. It was harsh, but it was the truth. To my surprise, she actually listened. More than that, she understood. She admitted that she knew how unhappy I'd been, how she'd been a terrible partner. She explained that when she left, it wasn't just about the therapist's suggestion. She had felt like such a burden that she thought leaving might be better for me. But she'd gone about it all wrong, blaming me instead of being honest about her feelings. She talked about how guilty she felt watching me come home exhausted from work, only to start cleaning and cooking until I passed out. It was the first time she'd ever acknowledged how much I'd been doing. She said her time away had made her realize how much she'd taken for granted. We ended up hugging for what felt like hours. When she asked for another chance, I could see glimpses of the woman I'd fallen in love with years ago. She seemed different somehow. More aware, more present. But I wasn't about to jump back in without some serious changes. I took a deep breath and laid out my conditions. If she wanted to try again, things would have to be completely different. No more half measures or empty promises. I needed to see real change before we could even think about getting back together. First, she needed to get a job. Any job. It didn't matter if it was waiting tables or folding clothes at a store, but she had to show up regularly and put in real effort. Second, she'd have to start coming to the gym with me 3 times a week. Not just for getting in shape, but to build a routine and get out of her head a bit. Third, while she was staying with her parents, she needed to help around their house. No more hiding in her room with her thoughts. Fourth, we'd go on one actual date every week. No excuses about not wanting to go out or feeling self-conscious. Fifth, we'd try couples counseling again. Sixth, she'd need to find a new therapist and be completely honest with them this time. And seventh, this was a big one. If the therapist prescribed medication, she'd have to take it consistently. No more forgetting or refusing to take them. I'd keep the meds with me if I had to, and she'd take them in front of me. I told her straight up that there wasn't a chance of us getting back together until she showed she could stick to these changes for a few months. I know ultimatums aren't usually the best idea, but I felt like I didn't have any other choice. I couldn't go back to the way things were before. To my surprise, she agreed to everything. Even more surprising, she actually started following through. Within 2 days, she was helping her parents around their house and actively job hunting. Her dad even mentioned that she seemed more cheerful than she had in years. I know we've got a long road ahead of us. There's still a good chance this might not work out, and maybe I'm an idiot for giving her another chance. But seeing her actually trying, actually making changes, it gives me hope. Maybe, just maybe, I'll get my wife back. Not the person she became after we got married, but the woman I fell in love with. I don't know what's going to happen. Part of me is still scared that everything will fall apart again, that I'll end up back in that miserable routine. But another part of me feels like I owe it to myself, to her, to our marriage, to give it one last shot. This time, though, I'm doing it with my eyes wide open. I'm not just hoping things will get better, I'm making sure they actually do. It's only been a few days since we had that talk, but something feels different this time. Maybe it's because I'm different now. I'm not that same person who would just take everything on himself and hope for the best. I know what I want, what I need, and I'm not afraid to ask for it anymore. Whether this works out or not, I know I'll be okay, because the biggest thing I learned during those 3 months apart wasn't just that I could live without her. It was that I could actually live for myself. Sure, some people might call me foolish for giving her another chance. Maybe they're right. But at least this time, it's my choice. Not because I feel obligated, not because everyone's pressuring me, but because I want to try. And if it doesn't work out, well, at least I'll know I gave it everything I had, with clear boundaries and real expectations. Sometimes that's all you can do. Set your terms, stand your ground, and hope for the best, while being prepared for the worst.